the most unethical and underhanded fundraising.
How many people would like to hear Mr. Gingrich speak today? Please put your hands. I think that's the majority of the people here. We would like to hear Mr. Gingrich speak today.
Because I was sure that your tradition of actually an intellectual discourse. Now,
oh my God. Can we start like a new chant?
I'm going to go ahead and sign us off over now and hope that all of you. You're actually making the first of the 2 points I was going to make, which is that I don't ask anyone to be for me, because if you're for me, you're going to vote, go home, and hope I can fix things. And the fact is, with the kind of irrational opposition we're going to face, we need to recognize that the election is the beginning of the change. The election is at the end of the process. And so I ask people to be with me for 8 years so that we can actually get the kind of changes we need in this country. And I appreciate the fact that 95% of you, maybe even 99% of you, discussion, and are not going to be drowned out by the 1% who try to impose their will by making noise. So, in that framework, I really wanted to come here today to make a different kind of speech, to try to establish a very new and different area of political discussion. Because I've been very struck that we keep trying to solve the entitlement problems and the healthcare problem without looking at the underlying drivers of those costs. And so what I want to come today and talk about, which I think this may be the first time any presidential candidate has ever talked about brain science, but it is an area that's really, really important. I'm going to explain why for a couple minutes, and then I will be glad to take questions, because I believe in participation, even if sometimes it's by people who are routed. It's part of the nature of freedom. So let me talk briefly about brain science. For 3 years, I co-chaired an Alzheimer's working group with former Democratic Senator Bob Kerrey of Nebraska. And as we got more and more involved, I was fascinated with the scale of the challenges we have in patterns that come out of the brain, whether it's Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism, mental health, brain injuries, side effects from concussions. When you look at all the different effects that come from your brain, it turns out that it is a major driver of what we call the budget. So when people are talking about how are you going to fix the budget over the next 20 or 30 years, and then they don't actually look at what's really driving the cost. A major factor is that we are living longer, which is good, but has budgetary implications. And when we live longer, by the time you're 85, almost 1 out of 2 Americans will have some form of dementia. Almost half. So the longer we live, the more likely we are for Alzheimer's to be a major factor. Although, as you know, there are folks who get it at much early ages, an early onset Alzheimer's, which affects, for example, the most successful women's basketball coach at 59 years of age. So as I look more and more at this, it occurred to me that the model for how we should think about the next 20 to 30 years is actually the iron lung. Now, in 1950, there were 60,000 Americans who got polio. And the iron lung was a device that had been developed to try to help people breathe, to help them survive polio. And if you had done a linear projection from 1960 to today and said, how many iron lungs will you need, and how much will it cost the federal government, you'd have come up with a number that is fairly big. In fact, today we need 0. Because in the early 1950s, Jonas Salk discovered a polio vaccine. And the speed of development back then was amazing. The first year, he tested his own family to prove safety. The second year, there were 1,400,000 American volunteers. The third year, the whole country got inoculated. I mean, it was an astonishing. Today, with the current Food and Drug Administration rules, that would be a 20-year process and probably cost $1 billion. They did it in 3 years. The result was polio became something that almost disappeared. It was a major fear. Franklin Delano Roosevelt spent his entire White House experience in a wheelchair. And it was a major concern of people. So now you come and you look at brain science. This is probably not a good sign. This was not people trying to cause trouble. This was well-meaning people backing up against the wall. And I'm not going to mention Katie's name today. So, I want to now talk to you a little bit about brain science. I start with two propositions. One is that you're going to get 4 to 7 times as much new science in the next 25 years as we got in the last 25. And the reasons are pretty straightforward. There are more scientists alive today than in all of previous human history. Every year they get better computers and better lab instruments. They're connected by email and cell phone, so the information flow is just dramatically faster. And then they're connected by venture capital and licensing and royalties, so they can move something from the laboratory to the marketplace faster than ever before in history. All those things mean that there's going to be a tremendous explosion of new knowledge in your lifetime, which, if we develop our policies to maximize that, allows Americans to have a better environment, a better economy, better national defense, a better way of life, and better health outcomes. Now, I think the brain will actually turn out to be the area that has the most growth. And there are two basic reasons. The first is that the instruments for looking at the brain and studying the brain are relatively recent. So compared to what we know about the rest of your body, we're really at the beginning stages of understanding what a living brain is like. It's compounded by the fact that your brain is really complicated. There are about as many synapses in your brain as there are stars in the known universe. So the two largest users of mathematics and computation are astrophysicists and brain scientists. And in a meeting we had about 6 months ago with a group of brain scientists, our estimate was that you need 2 full cycles of evolution in computing to get enough computing power and enough computing speed to cope with the volume of data we're going to get in brain science. So it's that big a deal. Now why, as a political figure, am I this intrigued? Because there are very direct consequences as it relates both to the quality of life and to the budget. I want to stay with Alzheimer's, which is the area I spent the most work on, and it's the easiest to talk about. Right now, we have about 5.5 million families dealing with Alzheimer's. And it's the whole family that deals with it. If you're an Alzheimer's caregiver, you are twice as likely to have a health problem as families that don't have Alzheimer's, because the stress of taking care of somebody over a long period of time actually breaks down the health of the healthy people who are around the person with Alzheimer's. So you have 5.5 million people with Alzheimer's, you have all of their families connected, and the number is growing annually. So that because as we get older, there are more and more of us who are susceptible. So the current estimate is that from now to 2050, those of you who are students think about this because you're the taxpayers this is going to affect. From now to 2050, the combined public and private cost of Alzheimer's is about $20 trillion. Now people worry about how big the national debt is. This would be about 1.5 or 1 1/3 national debts, just for Alzheimer's, between now and 2050. You can figure out for yourself how old you'll be in 2050. Most of you here will still be here. And you'll still be paying taxes and you'll still be engaged in the economy. So we're talking about $20 trillion going for care between now and 2050. The estimate is that you don't have to cure Alzheimer's to have a huge impact. If you simply postpone the rate of onset by 5 years, you end up saving somewhere between $6 and $8 trillion. Now, if you go and look at, for example, the effort that was being made by the super committee to find 1.2 trillion, and then you say, okay, so just breaking through with Alzheimer's would save somewhere between 4 and 7 times as much as the super committee is looking for. But the thing that makes it fascinating is, in order to get the knowledge you need to make the breakthroughs with Alzheimer's. You're going to learn enough about the brain that you're also going to have an effect on autism and on Parkinson's and on brain concussions and on mental health and on a whole range of areas. And when you add up all those different areas, you're now talking about a longer life with greater independence at lower cost. And if the United States develops those capabilities, you're talking about a huge export market. Because this, as the world gets wealthier, health costs become a bigger factor everywhere in the world. And if we had the breakthroughs that enabled us to say to the Chinese or the Indians or the Europeans or the Japanese, you know, how would you like to have a better way of dealing with this? You now create hundreds of thousands of American jobs, creating billions of dollars of products that are sold worldwide in the world market. So you end up with longer lives, greater independence, less stress on your family, dramatically lower cost in the budget, and a larger income. There are 4 parts to what I'm proposing. We're just now launching, beginning a discussion. In fact, after this talk, we're going to sit and talk to some experts about it here. And I've been meeting with people in Arizona and Washington and elsewhere. Essentially 4 parts. Part 1 is to develop a public-private effort on brain science research designed to maximize the speed with which we thoroughly understand the brain. Modeled to some extent on the Apollo project and on the Human Genome Project, and designed to really maximize the rate of developing new knowledge. Part 2 is to modernize the Food and Drug Administration so that we actually have the Food and Drug Administration understanding science in the laboratory and accelerating it getting to the patient rather than inhibiting it getting to the patient. That plays an enormous role because if we don't find a way to fix the Food and Drug Administration, virtually all of our scientific breakthroughs will in fact be developed outside the United States because it is so much easier to bring them to market outside the U.S. The third thing that I have as part of my general economic plan is zero capital gains tax. And the reason is you want a tremendous inducement for hundreds of billions of dollars of capital to come into the U.S. And part of the goal is to produce 50 to 70 Steve Jobs and Bill Gates in biology. So you have people with new breakthrough ideas. Remember, if you're back talking in 1960, the scale to which we now have computing power would have seemed absurd. IBM's original estimate in 1954, Tom Watson thought they would sell 4 computers. Now, think about how far off that is, okay? And if you look at, how many of you have an iPhone? Okay. You have the equivalent, I think, of about a 2003 laptop in terms of computing power. You know, and so think about the rate, if you take an overlay of the development of computation and wireless capabilities since 1960, and then you had a parallel overlay with health, with biology and with brain science, you get a similar kind of explosion of new capabilities, new things, new solutions, new products in a way that will be extraordinary. Finally, I believe that we have to also look at the use of modern technology and building models of caretaking so that we use everything we're learning, frankly, everything the Japanese are learning. The Japanese have invested very heavily in robotics for healthcare because they refuse to allow people in their country to do the work that in this country is often done by people who come here. And as a result, the Japanese have a huge labor shortage for labor-intensive industries. And so they're really trying to figure out, and I'll give you one example that came up in our Alzheimer's working group, which is if you're the spouse and your husband gets Alzheimer's and you get to a point where you have to help him get in and out of bed, as a general principle, the spouse suddenly is in danger of hurting her back trying to help him. Now, there are ways to make that dramatically different, and there are ways to use new technology so that you could have, in effect, an intelligent home that actually helped take care of somebody in a way that was both less expensive and was far more convenient and had fewer health problems for the people who were the caregivers. And so those are the 4 zones I want to work in, and I'm looking forward to a meeting with the experts here in a little while to talk about how we go forward. But in the interim, just to come back so you understand why this campaign has been so different. This is a very big idea in an area that I don't know of any political leader who's willing to tackle, that would lead to a dramatic explosion of new science, that would lead directly to a better quality outcome for health, which would lower the cost of health care, which would help solve our long-term budget problems, and would create a huge new zone of growing American jobs. But it requires having a conversation in an area that people just aren't used to talking about politically. And so that's typical of what I want to try to do with this campaign, is to lay out a series of breakthroughs, each of which moves us into the future so that when you graduate from college, you're more likely to have a job